The Cold War strayed into the unassuming settlement of Lithgow, Australia, one Sunday morning in a Mercedes-Benz. Sergeant Neville Brown of the Lithgow Police recorded the time as 4 a.m., January 27th, 1980. "I was patrolling the Great Western Highway south of Bowenfels with Constable First Class Cross," Sergeant Brown said. "We saw a 1977 Mercedes sedan, parking lights on, parked on the south side of the old highway known as 40 Bends."
That's the beginning, the first paragraph of a book. It sounds like a very fascinating mystery and death of someone in a car. It is, but it's far, far more than that. It's a book called The Crime of Patriots, and the subtitle is A Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA. But what is most fascinating is the author, Jonathan Kwitny, who is a highly respected journalist for the past 16 years of the Wall Street Journal. And Jonathan Kwitny is one of the best investigative journalists in the country. And his previous book is called Endless Enemies, which, in a way, this book is an extension of that, of a certain paranoia that possesses us, or that which is called our intelligence agencies. And this book, The Crime of Patriots, published by Norton, by the way, is a terribly exciting one. More than that, leads to all sorts of questions. Now, this book is almost a sequel to your previous one, Endless Enemies, isn't it?
Yeah, Endless Enemies was about the political and security consequences that we pay for the foreign policy, a covert foreign policy that our past 7 or 8 presidents have operated by. The Crimes of Patriots talks about how in the course of this policy, we sponsor people committing crimes against American citizens, crimes of fraud, theft of people's life savings, bringing in dope into the United States, all sponsored, aided, and abetted by the secret army that we have to carry out this secret foreign policy.
Well, again, I repeat, we're talking to one of the most respected journalists of the Wall Street Journal, and this is the point. Now, let's go to the beginning. You started reading a very passage that captures the attention of listeners and of readers. What was it? There was a car that where is Lithgow?
Well,
it's in Australia.
Lithgow is this unassuming little settlement about 90 miles inland from Sydney. The man in the car, with his head blown off by a rifle, was Frank Nugan, the co-chairman and co-founder of an international bank called the Nugan Hand Bank, which operated in 26 countries, including the United States, where it had offices in Washington, Honolulu, and San Francisco. His partner, obviously this threw quite a jolt into the people who had deposited money in that bank. His partner, Michael Hand, a CIA operative, fled Australia. In Nugan's pockets, the pockets of the man whose head was blown off, were the business card of William Colby, former director of Central Intelligence, who it turned out was the lawyer for Nugan Hand, and another business card of Congressman Bob Wilson, the ranking Republican on the House Armed Services Committee, who had recently been in Australia and had visited and socialized with the third partner in Nugan Hand, really, a man named Bernie Houghton. Houghton himself fled Australia as the bank collapsed in the partnership, in the company of Thomas Clines, a former CIA official who we have heard much more about this summer, having been hired by General Richard Secord as his deputy in running the Iran-Contra arms network.
Well, you realize what you're saying here has all crazy kind of, it's like a web of strands. You're talking about a bank called Nugan Hand. The names of Frank Nugan, an Australian, and what's Hand?
Michael Hand, former CIA operative.
Ex-Green Beret. Say, now, what's this got to do with you and me and CIA? We're talking about a bank in Australia, aren't we?
Well, except the bank also had offices in Washington, Honolulu, and San Francisco throughout Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. Its officers were a whole string of generals, admirals, top-level CIA personnel, people who ran the CIA's airline, people who, Walter McDonald, the head of economic research for the CIA, Guy Pawker, an advisor to Kissinger and Brzezinski. And this alleged bank, Nugan Hand, also performed services for the U.S. government. It financed the sale of some spy equipment to the Shah of Iran, and it financed the shipment of arms to a faction we were supporting in Angola that was invading that country. This is what we know as a result of the investigations by the Australian police. There could be much more we don't know. And yet, this bank that was so filled with high-level American officials, that was doing work with the U.S. government, was involved almost exclusively in illegal deals, moving money for dope smugglers, defrauding innocent investors out of their life savings, many of them American, civilians and servicemen serving overseas, and moving money illegally for all sorts of people who wanted to hide it from tax collectors, people like the Marcos family who were trying to get money out of their country without the knowledge of the people from whom it had been taken, and others.
You know, this is mind-boggling, and we're not going to cover all of that you have in your book because the strands are so many. It all concerns American foreign policy, CIA, but involves dope, defrauding investors, and to some extent assassinations too. So how does all, I still don't get the matching, and you got to bring this in. Nugan Hand, a guy named the Young American Hand, and this Australian Nugan, and this bank now has branches in Hawaii, in the Philippines, in Hong Kong, and American admirals and generals and colonels are involved as officers and were connected with this bank. Now you got to tie these strands together, Jonathan.
Well, we've seen this summer in the Iran-Contra affair how private organizations can have been started to make money, as, for example, General Secord and Albert Hakim admitted their organization was founded.
During the hearings, the Iran-Contra.
And yet, these same organizations can be working for the U.S. government, carrying out its foreign policy. The privatization of foreign policy, it was called. And the CIA and White House have favored this because it gave them a way to deny doing the things they really were doing. For example, when Eugene Hassenfuss's airplane went down in Nicaragua last October, starting the whole unraveling of this scandal, the government denied that it had any connection with the airplane because they had technically set it up as part of a private enterprise. Well, the hearings have so far made it sound like all this was invented by William Casey and Ronald Reagan and this administration. In fact, it was not. This is a manner of conducting foreign policy that the United States government has secretly used since the late 40s, early 50s. And that is what the Crimes of Patriots is all about, tracing the network of many organizations, just like the Secord Hakim one, that had hundreds of millions of dollars in accounts in the Caribbean, in Switzerland, in Hong Kong, in Australia, wherever, that moved money in secret ways, that helped all sorts of people do secret things, and was there on call when the White House wanted something done. A secret army raised of mercenaries to invade some country or try to overthrow some country. And we've tried to overthrow the governments of at least 36 countries that I can specifically list in there that we have documentary evidence to prove.
Well, just this very thing. Let's start with that. You mentioned several, the privatization of foreign policy. But before that, the overthrowing of governments. We know at this time it's common knowledge that we helped overthrow, say, Allende in Chile, Arbenz in Guatemala, But now you mention Australia. There was a man named Gough Whitlam who was a labor. Now that was overthrown through our
Well,
roles to some extent.
there is circumstantial evidence that is greatly suspicious. The Australians and, of course, the Americans deny that the United States was an instrumental factor. But Whitlam was Prime Minister of Australia, elected in 1972. In 1975, he caught on that the CIA bases there were involved in many things beyond what the Australian government had been told. Some of our most important bases, maybe our most important base outside the United States, is in Australia at Pine Gap and at Alice Springs, where they monitor all of the satellite traffic that's over the Soviet Union and China and Western Europe, where messages are relayed from space and where in turn our command posts in the United States relay messages to our nuclear submarines and so on. That's done by treaty with the Australians. Whitlam began to discover that there was also American government involvement in trying to manipulate Australian labor unions and other activities, and that the CIA really had a lot of covert activity there. It wasn't just a Defense Department installation as he had been told. He began to object, and the CIA then objected in kind. On November 8th, 1975, a man named Theodore Shackley, who's one of the most important CIA officials, one of the most important people in the post-war American foreign policy, who also was a character in the Iran-Contra affair, in his official capacity as Deputy Director for Operations of the CIA, he sent a long message to the corresponding intelligence group in Australia, strongly objecting to what Whitlam was doing and saying that either the Australian Prime Minister had to stop publicly discussing the CIA's activities there, or the United States would have to break off its long historical relationship with the Australian intelligence agencies, which surely they did not want. 3 days later, the Governor General of Australia, in a totally unprecedented move, fired the sitting Prime Minister. His power to do that was largely ceremonial, in the same way the Queen of England can dismiss or accept a Prime Minister there. You expect elections to determine that. And yet, in this case, without elections, he fired the Prime Minister and installed a conservative government. It turns out that that Governor General, John Kerr, had a long history of being financed by the Central Intelligence Agency. American tax money had paid him salary throughout the years, effectively, to travel, to speak, to write, and so forth. He's denied that the American government intervention, the note by Theodore Shackley and the CIA, had anything to do with his decision to fire Whitlam. The circumstantial evidence remains.
This is incredible. The Governor General Kerr, who was appointed technically by the man he fired, Gough Whitlam, the Labour Prime, elected by the people of Australia, was in the employ to some extent of the CIA.
Yes, he had been for years.
Yeah.
They had financed his, he sponsored certain groups. The CIA has sponsored overseas organizations which attempt to get friendly rulers in other countries to meet with each other, and various international organizations in which John Kerr was very prominent.
You know, we have to talk the various strings to the bow of the CIA. We're talking about a bank, a name which we haven't heard about in the United States, called Nugan Hand, a bank. And you open the book by the death of this guy, which presumably is suicide, because there was I assume that.
I believe it was suicide. There has been a lot of public speculation that he was murdered because it's a much more colorful story, but the evidence points to suicide.
Suicide, why? Because there was a catching up with what?
Well, interestingly, one of the...
And we'll come, of course, to CIA again and other matters.
Yeah. Well, everything leads back to the CIA and the U.S. government. The bank's books had been certified by Price Waterhouse, one of the big 8 accounting firms, for several years. Without that certification, it could not have attracted the investors that put the money in. The books were totally phony, and the certification was totally irresponsible. There was no real money in the bank. Whatever came in was stolen or else just transferred across international lines. Interestingly, Price Waterhouse, the office in the Bahamas, which is the one that certified the books, had also certified the books of other CIA banking operations that turned out to be fraudulent banking operations in the Caribbean that were also used for the CIA's support of Cubans who were attacking Castro. Anyway, just before Frank Nugan died, Price Waterhouse had brought in a new auditor to audit the books, and he objected. He started asking for evidence of the money that in fact wasn't there, and refusing to certify the books. It could be that there had been some kind of new management policy in Price Waterhouse. In any event, the government authorities in Hong Kong and Australia and Singapore were objecting and threatening to close down Nugan Hand. And I think Nugan realized that the fraud was going to come unraveled and he was going to wind up in jail. The Americans all just left, and none of them have been prosecuted or caught up with.
And you see, we have to come back to this bank, Nugan Hand, how it came to be, and who the Americans, because you have also connected with it as officers, one way or another, of its branches formed elsewhere, American admirals and generals and colonels. The references were great, weren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, many people, servicemen and ex-servicemen, put their money in because their former commanding officers were officers of this bank and lost every penny, lost their retirement amounts.
Now, what was the purpose? I still want to get the connection of CIA and Nugan Hand and American foreign policy.
Well, as we saw with the Secord Hakim operation, the United States government has relied for many years on private organizations that are run by trusted people, such as these ex-admirals and generals and CIA personnel who were involved with Nugan Hand. People they know they can trust if they need them. These people found organizations, this bank or finance company, arms trading companies, whatever it happens to be, and they found these organizations to make money and run them as profit-making entities. And they know that because they also take part in covert operations for the government, that nothing they do will be exposed, that no matter what crimes they commit, the U.S. government will wind up covering up for it because it doesn't want to expose the secret foreign policy operations. Exactly as there is so much evidence about the Contras involved in drug trafficking and using money from drug traffickers. And in the last chapter of The Crimes of Patriots, I name names, name amounts, name aircraft. I've got documents that I cite that show that drug aircraft were regularly refueled and maintenanced at Ilopango Air Force Base, where the U.S. government supplies the Contras and supplies the El Salvadoran government. And yet, and the Justice Department was informed of this over a period of years, and yet they refused to do anything about it. It was covered up because to uncover it would, while solving a drug case and major drug trafficking cases, would also expose and hurt this foreign policy initiative.
We have to come to that because we're talking about anything goes, and even the importation, exportation of drugs. Because now you hit something aside from the overthrowing of other governments, in this instance the Australian one, the Labour government of Gough Whitlam. Drug traffic. I know you quote Alfred McCoy, who wrote a book called Heroin Traffic in Southeast Asia.
The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia.
Now, and you speak of, there was a time when the drug use in America was diminishing.
Was there? I don't know. The more you read,
the more... McCoy's point, if I remember right.
I guess he may have said that in the 1940s, certainly there was a diminishing in the source of the drugs. The main source of heroin and later cocaine into the United States since World War II was the inadvertent result of American foreign policy operations. McCoy asserted that in regard to the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. His book was back in 1971 or 2. It seemed so crazy and off the wall at the time that not enough people took it seriously. But it was documented in great detail. And I went over there and retraced many of his steps, and he was absolutely right.
Now you're talking what the Golden Triangle is, which I take it as one of the centers of drug production and traffic in the world.
The center for opium and heroin, illicit.
And also at Nugan Hand, the bank. And you always remember the hand of CIA and how Nugan Hand is in that. We're talking, we make it clear, we're talking, in case you're wondering, is Jonathan Kwitny. He's an award-winning journalist of the Wall Street Journal, and many coup has been as a result of his work. And his previous book is called Endless Enemies, which deals with, again, American foreign policy and the enemies we pick up out of necessity to maintain this policy. And this book is called Crime of Patriots, and it's published by Norton. And we'll pick up on this matter of the Golden Triangle. Resuming with Jonathan Kwitny and his book, The Crime of Patriots, published by Norton, and the matter, and by the way, the subtitle, we have to repeat that subtitle. Subtitle is A True Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA, and Norton, the publishers. You mentioned the Golden Triangle.
Well, that is the area in Burma, Thailand, and Laos where the three countries come together, a jungly, mountainous area that has been the main source of illicit opium in the world since the early 1950s. It always, the farmers in that region grew opium poppies, but what really organized and greatly expanded their operations was the arrival with American support of the Kuomintang Army, the old Chinese army, after the overthrow of the Chinese government in 1949. We set up the Kuomintang in northern Burma to attack and invade Yunnan province of China, which it did throughout the early 1950s. All this was covert from the American public. The Chinese certainly knew about it, and the Burmese certainly knew about it, but the American voters and taxpayers weren't told. To supply them, the CIA hired on a guy named Paul Hellawell, who ran a company called Sea Supply Corporation, which brought arms and other supplies from the United States to Thailand and then took them up overland to the areas where this Chinese army was fighting. To help pay for all this, the Chinese army organized and expanded the opium production in the area. They organized the farmers, they centralized the buying of it, they started refineries to turn it into heroin there. Hellawell and Sea Supply organized at first mule trains to take the opium and heroin out of the Golden Triangle and where it was shipped to sea and then to the United States, to the great benefit not only of this Kuomintang army, but also of the Thai government that was subservient to the United States. American CIA officials were meeting regularly with the Kittagachorns and others who ran the Thai government, and before them, General Pao, throughout the 1950s, basically orchestrating that government. These people got wealthy off of this drug trade. There's just abundant documentary evidence. The Drug Enforcement Administration, among others, and congressional investigators now openly admit that this trafficking went on, and that later Air America, the CIA airline, flew the opium and heroin out of the Golden Triangle to Vietnam and then to the United States. This was just openly engaged in. It's now admitted. They admit what happens 10 or 15 years ago while trying to deny what is happening now, which is that the same kind of operation is bringing cocaine into the United States and supporting the Contra war.
Let me get this now, because now we're hitting something really interesting. Well, all is. We're talking about the drug traffic that we were encouraging in this battle against the forces of communism throughout. That's the ostensible reason for this all.
Well, it's happening. I don't think anybody intended
Yeah.
for it to happen. I don't think it was really a plan.
But this drug, where did the drugs go? They wind up here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the United States is a prime market. There was the trafficking organizations that Nugan Hand worked for also serviced England and Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand.
So we here in administration, whether it be the president or his wife or other people or not, talk about young got to stop
Say
using
no to drugs, yes. But
These very drugs have been brought in, the great many of them, by these very...
by the people
forces.
we're working with in these covert armies that are fighting our wars. The Contras now, earlier the Montagnards in Vietnam and Laos, and before them the Kuomintang army in Burma and Laos and Thailand.
In your book, you cite chapter and verse.
Oh, I name names.
Yeah.
The book is not relies very little on anonymous sources. Almost every interview is on the record. The names are named, and I have documents that I'll be glad to share or show anyone demonstrating this.
Now, how does Nugan Hand... Oh, by the way, there's a certain town in Thailand called Chiang Mai.
Chiang Mai.
Chiang Mai. Now, this is the dope center of the world, pretty much. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a city right on the edge of the Golden Triangle. And so people coming in and out, Chiang Mai is the commercial center.
Now, this
It's where the
bank,
money is.
Nugan Hand, has a branch in Chiang Mai. Why?
Well, there could only be one reason anybody would bring an international bank to Chiang Mai, and that's to take advantage of the dope trafficking, the money. But the incredible thing about this office was that it shared a suite with the office of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration in Chiang Mai. They shared a receptionist who answered the phones, took messages for Nugan Hand as well as the DEA. And it's worth noting in this connection that the DEA is often used as a cover.
the
Drug Enforcement Administration is often used as a cover for Central Intelligence Agency operatives.
This is, this almost has the makings of a farce. It does. Now, how does Nugan Hand, this bank that now has drug clients, quite obviously, why would it be in Chiang Mai? How is that connected with CIA? And how come all these admirals, we haven't named a number of them. One is named Admiral Bud Yates, a General Black, a variety of others,
General Manor and
Manor. How are they connected with
General
this bank?
Earl Koch. Well, Lieutenant General Leroy Manor was the commander of all U.S. troops in the Philippines, dealt personally with the Marcoses over the base negotiations there, and became head of the Nugan Hand branch in the Philippines, which took Marcos family money in. Manor later left to go back into the Air Force under some kind of arrangement that's so secret they won't talk about it. General Black, former OSS man, pal of Allen Dulles, the former director of Central Intelligence, Richard Helms, another one. He ran the Hawaii branch of Nugan Hand. Black had also commanded all U.S. troops in Thailand during the Vietnam War. General Earl Koch ran the Washington branch, former national commander of the American Legion. Admiral Earl Bud Yates was the president of the Nugan Hand Bank.
Well, how come? I mean, I'm trying to figure.
Well, I think they saw it as a way to make money and serve their country.
Why is the Nugan Hand Bank? Now we come. Because you speak of how the CIA works. There are three categories of CIA-connected enterprises:
Mhm.
the proprietary, the front, and the allied. Explain that.
Okay, well, I think it's very important because people tend to ask the question, was it a CIA operation or wasn't it, as if that is easy to answer. We had a wonderful illustration in the Hassenfuss Plain last year of how the Contra Arms Network, was it a CIA operation or wasn't it? Well, it was and it wasn't. It was set up privately, so it could be denied. Now, a proprietary is a company that the CIA owns, controls, and manages to perform a service for it, like Air America was. And there seem to be fewer of those because they want the deniability, such as with these private organizations. A front operation is something that's set up that does not really do what it says it does. It's only there to provide a cover for CIA operatives. But the main kind of organization that has helped CIA work is an organization that is set up and controlled privately by people who are making money, and yet these people tend to be trusted individuals, such as former generals or admirals or CIA personnel would be, who can be called on to do government work if necessary.
And so the Nugan Hand Bank would fall in the third category.
Well, again, to get the smoking gun, it simply is inconceivable that the CIA didn't know this was going on and that these former high-level officials were part of it. The Australian government has come out and said that the bank was doing work for the American military intelligence establishment, actually naval intelligence, through the sale of spy equipment to the Shah of Iran and the arming of our faction in Angola. But to say exactly what agreements were made or who knew what, you can't really do. The generals and admirals and CIA people all swear up and down that they had no idea of the bank's illegal activities and the dope running and so forth. And yet almost everything the bank did was illegal. It had almost no legitimate banking operations whatsoever.
The big question is how it got away with it. How many years did it last?
Well, 7 from the point of origin, although really only the last 4 were as a huge international organization.
Now, weren't there investigations of it that was squashed?
Yes, the Australian government tried over and over to investigate it. The Hong Kong government tried over and over to investigate it. The U.S. government absolutely refused to cooperate, would not provide any information to them, stonewalled. George Bush, the vice president in 1982, finally was over in Australia on a trip and was confronted by the head of the Labor Party, who wanted to know about the CIA's, how the American government explained all these connections with Nugan Hand and its illegal activities. Bush, again, refused to provide any information except to give his personal assurance that the U.S. government had nothing to do with this bank, but again, refused to give any evidence. When I wrote a series of articles about it for the Wall Street Journal, the Senate Intelligence Committee came and said they wanted to investigate it. Actually, Barry Goldwater, who was then the head of it, had written a letter asking for an explanation of all this. At the request of the committee, I wrote out a list of questions regarding the material that the American government would have known the answer to about the criminal activities of Nugan Hand. They thanked me for this list. They said they held closed-door hearings involving Casey and others, came back and said they had thoroughly investigated it. The cooperation I had given was very valuable, but the answers to the questions could never be revealed because of national security. To me, it is absolutely incredible that a national security could be cited as a reason for hiding evidence of crimes committed by American citizens against other American citizens. Nobody from the bank has been punished.
We speak of nobody's been punished in the attempts investigation because fraud was involved there. Obviously, a great number of deposits in the bank were euchred. There's a Dr. Ogden. There's an American sergeant, all variety. Guys working in Saudi Arabia, American construction workers and GIs. And so, but the bank obviously took them, handed.
There were claims totaling $50 million from these innocent duped investors. There were a lot more potential claims that were never filed because a lot of people that the bank took lived in third world countries where it was illegal to export money, and so the mere depositing of money in Nugan Hand was illegal. And so to file a claim and admit you had deposited money would be to admit that you had broken the currency regulations of Thailand or Malaysia or Singapore or whatever country you happen to live in. And so people didn't file claims. Hundreds of millions of dollars was stolen, clearly.
That's marvelous. I mean, I'm not the stealing, but the fact that they couldn't file claims because they were doing illegal stuff. Nugan, Frank Nugan, and certainly Hand, Mike Hand, knew that. And
Well, that
so-
was the point of the bank. That's what
Yeah.
the point was, to move money across international boundaries that against the laws of the countries involved.
So we got to come back to CIA. What was the connection? What purpose did Nugan Hand Bank serve the CIA?
Well, the only specific things that the Australian investigations came up with were, again, these deals involving Iran and Angola. What other purpose? I think it would be a good question to ask the CIA.
Now
They have denied, of course, any involvement with Nugan Hand, but they also denied any involvement with Eugene Hassenfuss's plane in Nicaragua and a whole slew of other things that we now know they were deeply involved with.
Now, there were several investigations. One was a Stewart Commission, there was a task force, and there's an investigating O'Brien. And what have they uncovered, and what difficulties are they? Because you also have a suppressing or a putting down of investigation. By whom?
Much of the material in the Crimes of Patriots comes from the cooperation of these various Australian investigators because they were so frustrated. They managed to prove beyond any doubt, with endless sworn witnesses, documents that simply can't be argued with, of all these vast crimes: money stolen, money illegally moved, tax cheating, and huge dope cartel transactions, and, as you mentioned, money to bribe cops to finger informants. There were assassinations, a series of killings of informants against the drug network. And the bribe money was put in Nugan Hand bank accounts. With all these crimes uncovered, the next question is, what is the role of all these generals and admirals and CIA personnel? Well, they're gone. Can't be questioned under oath in Australia. None of them were. The U.S. government refused to cooperate, never investigated or prosecuted. They did. There were some investigations. The FBI had material on it, and the Customs Department had material on it. They admitted this, but they refused to disclose what it was for reasons of national security. The FOI, Freedom of Information Act requests, brought back documents that were completely blacked out with markings that it was national security material. How is U.S. national security involved in the commission of these vast crimes?
Well, that's the question. So that's been quashed all the time. Those investigations, yeah.
Yeah. My own, as I mentioned, with the list of questions to the Senate Intelligence Committee. And the list of questions, unanswered questions, is printed as an appendix to the Crimes of
I know
Patriots.
you have about 50 of them or so.
57 questions, whose answers are secret, secret national security information. But the questions are all about drug trafficking and theft.
Now, people were gypped, quite obviously, who lost their savings, and they were suing and didn't recover. And there's dope involved with it. We haven't talked about the assassination attempts involved, but there are these admirals and generals connected with it, whether it's front men or not, whether just as figureheads or not. Now, one of them has become the head of Retired Officers of America.
General Manor.
Yeah. And then but what was Admiral Yates's role in our country? He was in charge of a nuclear ship, wasn't he?
He was in charge of the aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy. He was also later promoted to deputy commander in charge of all planning for the Pacific forces.
Well, the reason I asked that is because apparently as he comes forth and not knowing what it's about, there's someone slightly, shall we say, slow.
Well, he insists he didn't know what was going on, even though he was president of the bank. Yet, working as an admiral for the United States government, he commanded hundreds of thousands of troops. He was responsible for billions of dollars in American taxpayer money, and yet he denies any knowledge of what the Nugan Hand Bank was doing, which he was president of.
And so what do we come to? You know how we should end this? I found there are many stunning sequence in the book. There's one involving a shredding by a United States official of certain documents. The word shredding is now part of our vocabulary and lexicon, not simply even pre-Ollie North. And this is page 350 of your book. When questions, was it you? When someone's asking questions of someone, and the official was shredding documents.
Oh, one of the when I went to the Customs Department,
It was
because
you.
they had,
Okay.
yeah, they really went out of their way to stonewall me all over Asia when I was investigating this. But in Hong Kong, I went to the customs officer who I knew had investigated Nugan Hand, and asked, to talk about the situation. He made an appointment for me to come into the office. When I did, he was sitting behind a desk on which was a shredder. He was seated with the shredder and the pile of documents, which were kind of computer printout documents, which bore a diagonal red stripe down them, outlining in white the letters classified. And he was feeding these documents into the shredder as he was talking to me. He refused to answer any questions about Nugan Hand. He absolutely refused to say anything. I finally, we can't comment on anything that's under investigation or might be under investigation. I asked if Nugan Hand was under investigation. He said, there wasn't an investigation, we made some inquiries. We can't comment. I finally asked him if I could find out what was being shredded. He said it was none of my business what was being shredded. The U.S. government prevented me, the communications officer from the American Embassy in Bangkok, prevented me from talking to drug enforcement agents in Chiang Mai who very much wanted information I had from the Australian investigations of the characters in Chiang Mai who allegedly had deposited hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions total, in Nugan Hand. The American Embassy in Bangkok ordered them not to talk to me, and they were unable to get this information or give me any.
I think that's the way we end our conversation when that guy said to you, none of your business what I'm shredding. And we're talking about Nugan Hand, possible CIA connections. This is probably what the book is all about. Told it's none of our business.
That's it.
What's being done. We're talking to Jonathan Kwitny, who is a brilliant investigative journalist, 16 years of, I got to make this clear, the Wall Street Journal. And you'll see his columns and commentary there. This is a sequel, you might say, to a previous book, Endless Enemies. That is a powerful one. But this one called The Crime of Patriots, dealing seemingly with a small bank or a big bank in Australia, but more than that with connections, CIA, us, foreign policy, deception, dissemblance, and none of your business as far as the American public is concerned. Norton, the publishers. The subtitle is A True Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA. It sounds sensational. It is, but also, unfortunately, very true. And thanks to Jonathan Whitney, we know more than certain people say we should know.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.